Good morning, everybody. I am Elizabeth Bernhard, Executive Director of the Manufacturing Growth Alliance, or MGA, and we are so glad that you joined us today for this great conversation. A few housekeeping items before I turn it over to our guests and speakers. This session is being recorded, and you all will have access to this session either to check on it later or to share with your colleagues. It'll be posted to MGA's YouTube channel shortly after the session is complete. You will also have access to the slides after the session is over. During our presentation, we encourage you to submit your questions by putting them directly into the chat. And most of them will be held until our formal Q&A session at the end of our presentation. Also during the Q&A, I will change your settings so you can personally unmute yourself if you wish and ask a question personally. And we are scheduled to go until 11 a.m. this morning. With that, I'm happy to introduce my friends and colleagues, Glenn Jacks and Aaron Warwick. Glenn serves as a Customer Solutions Advisor with North American Contractor Link, a strategic partner of MGA. In his role, Glenn works diligently to connect the best contractors in the U.S. to manufacturers and industry partners all over the state of Michigan. He has over 30 years of field experience, including extensive experience supporting the automotive and manufacturing industries. And Aaron is an AEC practice leader with Ignite, and he holds advanced degrees in architecture and engineering, and he leads business development efforts for Ignite. And he has a wealth of experience guiding and advising professionals across a variety of industries. With that, gentlemen, I turn it over to you, and welcome and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you, MGA, for this opportunity to meet with Aaron and Ignite. We are starting to hear more and more from our customers about cybersecurity, so this topic we're very eager to jump into. But before we do, really quick, like Elizabeth said, I am Glenn Jackson. I am a Custom Solution Advisor for North American Contractor Link, and my territory is Michigan. I performed industrial maintenance, like she said, for almost 30 years. About 6 years ago, I hung up my tools to help plant managers with the growing need of finding the appropriate contractors for their projects. So if a facility needs a contractor, please take advantage of my experience and our network, all at no cost, lining up the contractors for consideration. We focus mainly on the bigger industrial maintenance stuff, but basically we can help with any type of project that you have. We're your easy button. We're always here, eager to help. Now, with that being said, I'd like to turn things over to Aaron, and we'll get the show rolling.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be on the call today. We're going to come back to that, the sourcing that you mentioned with North American Contractor Link a little later, because that may even be one of the risks that we address in this webinar is as we change personnel, staff up and staff down. But let me tell you a little bit about Ignite. We're an intelligent content platform. Think of us as a turnkey, unified, AI-powered solution for running your business. So we're much more than a replacement for file servers or generic cloud storage. We offer secure file sharing, data governance, content lifecycle management. We call RAD, which is sort of retention, archive, and deletion automation. ROTS, so redundant, obsolete, trivial information detection and mitigation, threat detection, recovery. It's a smart platform. We have about 26,000 customer companies on all 7 continents. So that's millions of end users using Ignite today. And we make IT easier. We typically save about 1/3 of IT costs. We also typically have returned about 150 hours per employee per year in productivity because we're easy. So that's a little bit about Ignite and why I'm here with you today. We're talking about cybersecurity and manufacturing. We're going to get into that, and Glenn will share some information in a minute about what's unique about cybersecurity and manufacturing. And then we'll talk a little bit about cloud growth and what that means, pros and cons. There will be new risks to prepare for, and then some smart strategies to help you protect your data. That's basically the gist of how today will go. So let's get into that first question. What makes cybersecurity unique in manufacturing? And with that, I'll hand it back to Glenn.
Glenn, you're muted.
How's that? Is that better?
That's better.
I'm a first timer, guys. I apologize.
I mean, I know you're quiet, Glenn, but okay.
Hey, we've heard from our customers around the country what makes security problematic in manufacturing. Some of the most common concerns noted were legal issues impacting their reputation, especially putting intellectual property at risk, real financial costs and damage from unplanned downtime, cost and resources to respond quickly to increase compliance from customers, governing organizations, etc. Aaron, these all seem like valid concerns. What is Ignite's perspective on what makes manufacturing and cybersecurity unique or perhaps different from other sectors?
Those are good things to be thinking about, Glenn. I want to talk a little bit about what a breach means in general, but just a quick observation. And I'm coming from the AEC space. You're wondering why I'm here. I've worked with a lot of manufacturers that don't think of themselves as owners, but they are owners of the facilities that they have, of the products they manufacture, but also of the data that's generated and consumed along the way. And so I'm, even though I'm an AEC badge, there really are very related problems, whether it's someone interfering with design and construction operations, or whether it's someone interfering with, product manufacturing and the results. We're talking about IP in either case. We're talking about so many things that are similar. So let's move into what actually happens when that data is put at risk. The first thing is it's kind of four ways you're being extorted, I guess, when this happens, and you're being prevented access to your data. And so it doesn't matter if I'm an architect doing design work, or if you're trying to put a new product on the line, that it doesn't matter what it is. If you can't get access to it, you can't work. The second is that data, it might be your IP that is now being shared out there to the world. And so others are getting access to data that you can't access yourself. That's a problem. And then your customers are getting attacked. Your customers could be whoever's buying that building, but your customers could also be whoever's buying your product, whoever's distributing your product. And now you're kind of associated with that attack. So that's not a good thing for either you or them. And so this is a big deal, and especially if that continues on. So if you can't get out of it, you have sort of an ongoing harassment issue, and that can apply to you and your whole supply chain. So these are four different things. This is big impacts when we start talking about things like a breach. And we're going to start here. We're not going to be just talking about ransomware and breaches and things, any of that kind of stuff. But just to give you a little insight into where it can hurt, right? And the second question is, can you afford it? I mean, if the industry standard to recover from a cyber attack is more than 2 weeks, and it's, business time, the question, is, can you stay in business with zero output? Like in many industries, at best, that's an insurance claim. At worst, that's a firm or business continuity issue. Like you may be closing the doors. That's a long time to have nothing happening, right? So we need to take this seriously. Now, we're going to shift into kind of a bigger picture at this point, like the pros and cons of the cloud as it pertains to all of this, because this is our new reality. So we're going to talk about why the cloud is good and what it might bring along with it. We've seen unprecedented growth. Of course, it was accelerated by the pandemic, but this has been happening for some time now. And this is among a subset of our customers, thousands of customers, though, so it's pretty good data. More than a 750% increase in what's being stored in the cloud in just the last 5 years. Sometimes we're seeing 100% per year growth or more. which is pretty substantial. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is cloud-based collaboration. We're just getting used to systems talking to each other. We're getting used to using tools that are connected. Everything from, intelligent manufacturing equipment to the facility systems, they're all online now in some form or another. And they have been for some time, but the ability to connect these tools easily is exploding. Another is inorganic growth. We see this all the time, right? Where companies will buy other companies up, and that when you don't know what to do with all of that company's legacy data, it just gets thrown into the pile with everything else because cloud storage is free, right? So we see this giant increase as this kind of growth happens, especially in that time between an acquisition and when companies sort this stuff out. We're generating more data because our tools are smarter and they're generating more data all the time and consuming more, like the tools that are becoming smarter in what we do every day. But that results in growth of data stored in the cloud. And then finally, our requirements for both best practice standards and legal requirements for compliance and retention are only increasing. So we see data growth that naturally happens due to like a fear to lose the wrong data when we might legally be required to keep it. So there's sometimes this not so great attitude of just let's keep it all, right? And so we end this almost unprecedented and really untenable amount of, we can't continue to store everything forever. That's not a good policy. So there are new opportunities, and we talked about some of the reasons why cloud data is growing, and there's some advantages to that, right? We can centralize operations. We can operate globally as if we're, in one office these days, which is pretty cool. We can collaborate much more flexibly on the go, at home, on the job site, in some cases. And then our tools for analysis and, just sort of generating information about where we're being efficient and so on are much more powerful now because they can use server computational power in the cloud. Mixed reality is happening all over the place. We're using, point cloud data, photogrammetry as well. Automation of systems, automation of production, automation of like finding problems. There's a lot of power out there and intelligence. And of course, AI is sort of laying over top of all those other tasks, providing some of that intelligence. So these are all great, or can be, right? But they also expose us a little bit. So we've seen at the same time as the rapid data growth happening that financial data gets exposed, or personally identifiable information gets exposed, or IP gets exposed because we may not have the right processes in place. And so as we grow our data store, we also sort of grow our exposure. Those are the pros and cons, if you will, at a high level of us moving to the cloud. And the cloud is sort of, in a way, a precursor to everything else we're talking about, because we are inevitably moving to a place where the cloud is important in our day-to-day. So if we were not doing a great job with the file server in the closet down the hall, then we're probably not doing a very good job at all as we blow up our cloud stores or maybe our mini data silos in the cloud. And that's what we'll talk about here for a few minutes. These new risks. So multi-cloud sprawl, as I just mentioned, is one of those things that it's our reality, even if we're not thinking about it. You are probably every day touching all of these different clouds: Google Cloud, Microsoft's cloud, Apple's cloud. In your business, there's going to be a number of different places where everything from HR, tasks are performed to production tasks are performed. And then you have, document editing and stuff happening in the middle, and you have stuff being fed out to machines. And like, these may all be different silos. They are likely being touched by the same staff. Like, one person could be using up to 100 different products in a day without even thinking about it. That's just the way the day goes. But what comes out of that is a risk that data ownership and stewardship becomes fuzzy. And what do I mean by that? Like, how do I really know, if I'm using this data in different systems, where it should be, when, why it should be accessed by whom, and for how long, Like those are hard questions to answer when you know that you're kind of using this information here and here. Which one is right? And when is it right? So that because of those challenges, a lot of times we just don't solve the problem. We just leave it alone. But that can, at best, lead to wasted time as we're kind of moving data around, but also can give us some security exposure. Another risk, and these are going to be, hopefully these are all familiar to you. Like these are not things that you maybe have talked about before, but they're things that you've encountered certainly almost every day. So risks for things like version conflicts, duplication. Let's admit that we're probably predisposed to saving files offline. Let's have a backup just in case the thunderstorm I'm sitting in right now, as I present to you, takes over my machine, right? Like there are habits we've developed, let's say, over the last 30 years of working on computers, where we tend to pull things down to work on them, if you will. The problem with that in a collaborative space, of course, is that I'm doing that while Glenn's doing that, while Jim and John are doing that. And all of a sudden I have 4 different versions of file that are out of sync with changes, and somehow we have to reconcile those. I mean, so best case, we've slowed ourselves down. Worst case, we don't know what's right, and we can even disrupt business operations because we're so far off on something that's important, especially co-design files, things that are like, the main revenue source for our company. So if we're not working together, we can be basically stepping on each other. The next major area, and this one it's funny because it's been a problem for so long and yet it's still a problem, is uncontrolled file sharing. Too often, files are still shared via email attachments. Far too often. This should never happen. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But this is commonplace. And what that means is you're throwing it to the wind. So the second it's left to your hands, it is now at anyone's disposal, the recipient and anyone that they happen to want to share it with forever, right? And even worse, I can't manage that after the fact. So if I send them a new version the next week of whatever it is I sent them, there's no guarantee they'll ever look at the new one, and they're not going to be working off obsolete data forever. So there's no management after the fact. There's no shutting it off. There's no correction, none of that. So this is a strong risk, even if you're using a secure method for sharing that file as an attachment, you're still sending it as an attachment and it's gone. I'll turn it back to Glenn for just a minute to maybe flag some of these safe data practices.
Okay, Aaron, I knew cloud computing was growing significantly, and in our own business, we are asking everyone to become better stewards of our data. But I must admit, all the precautions we follow seem to be more like guidelines or suggestions. As an industry, we were curious about how well we adhere to safety data practices. And to be honest with you, we were shocked. A significant number of respondents report lack of understanding policies, which would appear to be related to training and building and understanding of these policies. Perhaps even more alarming were intentional policy violations. This would appear to be an even bigger problem. How do we build cybersecurity competency? Aaron, are we just kidding ourselves? Is what we're doing not working?
Yeah, the one there that when you mentioned the intentional violations, like that is, I mean, that's just scary. What we're doing, as you said, isn't making it from paper to people. It's not either, it's the weakest link. Like we're just either not getting folks to accept the importance. There's some, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the sort of the education piece of this. So yeah, smart strategies. Well, so you just kind of, highlighted this. The very first thing I would point out is employee awareness, right? This thing matters. If you don't, your job might be affected. And it's not because of something you did, it's because the whole company is going to suffer. And that'll probably end up impacting, each employee, right? So having basic awareness of phishing, these are things that would help in personal life too. Just understanding when someone's after your credit card or any other information is useful. Payment processes in a company need to be safeguarded just like they are in in your personal life, right? So this kind of education seems so remedial or so basic, but it needs to happen. You need to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of just being on our defense of, about these things. And then you get into the things that I think we all dislike, like password policies. You wonder why those things are, pushed down from IT. Why do I have to have a long password with special characters and so on? It's, again, I'd go back to the personal thing. I'm using a password manager nowadays because I used to have, my system for memorizing all these passwords for sites. And now I generate these random 40-character passwords to at least slow down any attempts or make my stuff look less appealing. I think it's a good idea. Multi-factor, being able to ping your cell phone on the side is probably a good idea. And as tools become more sophisticated, so as the various softwares that we use in business are getting smarter, they're starting to offer things like passphrases that make all this stuff easier. So we're starting to get to a point where it's a little bit less of a burden on the employee to use long passwords and more easy to do for both sides. So these are important, though. They're not just put in place for no reason. They're put in place to slow down or discourage attempts to break into the business. Again, it's about starting with knowledge. So we talked just a second ago about knowledge in general, about suspicious behavior, phishing, things like that. But the impacts of ransomware that we discussed earlier are so significant to a business. I mean, complete shutdown of a business. So educating users, don't hide the discussion, because this is super commonplace now. It'd be a shocking percentage, especially in manufacturing. I think maybe the third leading, depends on the stats, either first to third in terms of its threat from cybersecurity attacks, depending on the source. So this is super commonplace that they'll go after a manufacturing business, and ransomware needs to be something everybody knows exists. And then from sort of a management perspective, you need to just have a plan. Is your plan just to restore the latest and greatest stuff quickly so you can get back in line? Is there an idea of having a full restoration anytime, which just requires a different kind of system in place in order to be able to just flip a switch and go back to full production? What is that supposed to look like? And then, of course, and I'm speaking as from the perspective of a company that offers this kind of thing, but if you put in place systems that will automatically do behavioral detection, excuse me, both for internal and external threats. If I see, if the system sees a user downloading a bunch of files they don't normally do, that's a behavioral change. It'll flag an admin, let them know, hey, maybe this person's going to leave the company. Maybe something's happening that's unusual. At least it's worth a discussion. And then the same thing happens from the outside with cyber attacks. When there's a change in the way data is attempted to be accessed, then the software finds it. Often this is powered by AI. And then we talked about the sharing thing, but man, using a link versus an attachment is easy and important. In fact, there's software out there that will automatically convert an attachment a user tries to send into a link to a secure site. And once it's a link, especially if it's a smart link software, so not a generic, a generic cloud sharing service, I won't mention any, but not a consumer grade link sharing, but something that's more professional, then it'll allow you to manage the link, to limit it to maybe specific recipients. And I'll build out a couple things here to allow you to monitor on the other end what IP addresses are accessing it, what they've been shared with, to limit it to view only where appropriate, to limit it to only certain people to view it at all, to expire at a certain time. And then have the ability to, at the end of working with a certain vendor or at the end of a project, be able to just remotely kill all links so that they're not out there forever to be discovered and used in the future is handy, right? So somebody has a central link management is super valuable. And these are all available today. These are not things that are hard to do. It's just a matter of making the right choice. So if we talk about just going beyond the basics, we've been talking about some of the things you can do for almost nothing cost-wise, just more of an education perspective up till now. But if you need more than that, and this was all remedial for you, then be thinking about data governance. Data governance is thinking about content, documents, et cetera, across their whole life cycle, long before maybe a project starts and long after it ends. What do you archive? When do you archive? Do you archive automatically? Not everything needs to be live forever, right? And not everything legally should, but things might legally need to be available for a certain period of time. So it's a complicated thing, but it can all be automated based on how data is used, who last accessed it, when it needs to be shut down, when it's done legally, and so on. Also, you can put tools in place that automatically identify sensitive information. I mean, we've been doing this with AI-powered capabilities for more than 10 years in our product, for example, but we'll automatically detect when PII, personally identifiable information, or sensitive financial data, that kind of thing shows up. So use some kind of tool that does that, right? As we talked about earlier, when it came to a path to restoration around ransomware, understand and prioritize the data that's most important to keep your business going if you know the inevitable threat comes along at some point. And it wouldn't hurt to have someone on point for this, because if nobody is specifically a data owner, then nobody's minding the store, and these things need to be kind of continuously managed, at least continuously understood. You might work with outside resources. So if you're not a big company and this is beyond your scope to have a person hired for this job, right? Then that's okay. Like, that's typical. So you might create a tiger team with your friendlies, with vendors, suppliers, et cetera, that you work with all the time, or like sister companies that are that can understand the same situation you might be in, to help work together on policies. Same thing with your own vendors on joint responsibilities. It's like, hey, this is how we're going to do this. You play a part, because we're going to be susceptible to any problems you have. So we need to be in lockstep here. You might not be able to hire a security officer, but you might have a fractional security officer shared by a number of companies, so that someone is kind of available as the expert, if you will, for any questions that come up with respect to security. And then you might set cyber liability standards and limits. If you haven't defined them already, that might be something contractually you need to think about. Then once you consider these topics, like getting to this level of knowledge, if you will, then it's time to apply practical strategies. So what does that mean? Practical data governance. I mentioned this earlier, but holding on to everything forever is not the answer. Like, yes, cloud storage is inexpensive. Getting any useful information out of unmanaged and unfettered growth cloud storage is going to be hard. Like, you're not going to be able to turn that into actionable knowledge, because it's going to be a mess. So understanding what you have, where it is, who and why it needs to be accessed, when it needs to be accessed, for how long, so to speak, those are important things. And that requires that you actually pay attention to this cloud store and not just build it up. And so it does help, and I mentioned this earlier, but it does help to have tools in place that will help you with that. And they do exist for helping you to retain, archive, recover, delete, things like that, all in an automated fashion. So it's basically hygiene being performed on your data all the time. And then it's difficult to get rid of all of these tools and applications we use, or any of them, really. We've got habits, we've got processes in place, and so on. But it does help to get a better understanding of what's actually out there. It wouldn't hurt, for example, to speak to the end users, all of the employees in different groups, different business units, to say, what is it you use every day, to find this out? Because it's very common that there are many more applications in use in a company than what you're aware of. Like, here's what corporate buys. Here's the other 40 things being used by employees because they had to find a solution to something quickly. And they didn't ask, they just got it done. That's called shadow IT, and it's an issue in almost every company. So be aware of that, or at least gain an awareness of that by having a conversation with the end user. And then look for, or give preference to, any kind of application that has APIs that are open. So in other words, they can be connected. If they don't offer an integration out of the box across tools, one can be quickly built. because as we get more and more into the cloud and inevitably we just keep adding more capabilities, the ability of these things to talk to each other is really important. Like we can't expect to ever get down to the one platform to rule them all. It's just not realistic. And so as a result, we need the ability for the data to move where it needs to move to get things done. And then communicate. This feels really hard, but when something happens, and it will happen, it's not a matter of if, you need to be on top of it. So this might have to go to whoever's doing PR in the company, but it's the truth. Like this is an example of a press release from a company that got hit with ransomware, and they had a plan to communicate, but you need to have both an internal plan. It's like, here's what we're doing about it. Here's how it's going to affect your job for the moment, because employees' jobs are going to be affected when the line can't run. And then have to have an external plan. So what do we actually tell our customers? What do we tell, the various suppliers and vendors? What do we do, on the press side? And I'm going to be speaking on a cybersecurity panel next week in Dallas. We have an FBI person who's going to be on that panel. He's got like 20-something years of experience doing the cybersecurity task force or whatever it is for the Dallas area. And he runs the AI task force too now. But I mentioned that because he said, a lot of folks are afraid to talk to government entities when something goes wrong. He's like, we're here to help. Like, this is something we live in this world every day. So let us know. We can actually, oftentimes help, move things in a positive direction more quickly. We're not the enemy here. So anyway, having these kind of plans in place, just like who do we talk to? I never thought about this, but like it's becoming so commonplace that it should just be another process in the manual that, hey, when this happens, here's who we call, here's how we deal with it. So a couple of key takeaways, nothing too heavy here. I hope this has been, all been kind of straightforward. Like this is, just good practical planning. But it would be a misconception to think that nobody wants your data. We're too small. It doesn't matter. If you're easy, you're definitely a target. And so a lot of times smaller is easier. So don't ignore this thinking that it doesn't apply, because it'll happen. Like this is just becoming our world we live in, right? Also, this is about your reputation. So make sure it's a leadership focus. Like this should not be something that's driven by IT, for example. This should be something that the company is aware of and the company takes steps to be ready for, just because it's another way, you would prepare, you install systems in the buildings for a fire. You should prepare, for this kind of thing to happen too. Right. And, I skipped ahead accidentally. You're not alone in this. There are so many, I think 5 years ago, we didn't even have these conversations because it was considered kind of like hush hush behind the scenes. It's a negative thing. We don't want to talk about it. And now I think we're at a point where everybody realizes, especially as we've all gone to the cloud, that this is our reality. And as we've done that, it's become a topic that's spoken about a lot. So you should be aware that everyone else is in the same boat, right? I mean, yeah, some of the big players have already taken proactive steps, but there are so many companies that are just now thinking about, okay, I need to be proactive about this. So now's as good a time to start as any, and you're definitely not alone. So I'll move back ahead to the next slide, but Elizabeth, this might be a good time if there's any outstanding questions to take those.
Perfect, Aaron. Yeah, there are some that have been entered into the Q&A. So one of them, there are differing opinions about the security of Microsoft applications, specifically Teams. Is there a real risk?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm not an expert in that. I would say that the things to think about, things that come to mind for me in response to that question are permissioning structures. Is this meeting, adequate permissioning for the granularity of the permissioning for what I need to access? Are the right people accessing at the right time? Where's that data really sitting? Am I using OneDrive essentially to store everything? And if so, how is that, or SharePoint, how is that structured? But that's kind of the extent of how I can answer that.
Okay. Another one, as a small manufacturer, we have been asked to integrate with a customer's supply chain software. What should our concerns be regarding our own data and operational systems, or OT?
Yeah, I guess I would think about first of all, the software may have certain settings, may have certain protections in place for your own controls. If it doesn't, if it means that you are essentially live sharing your information into this workflow and it could go to anybody, then you have to sort of manage that contractually. So that's tricky, right? Like that, there are pros to being able to collaborate more live, more real time, but you are a little bit more exposed in terms of your own work product. So then you have to manage that sort of from a legal perspective.
Thank you. And then another question. Even if we rigorously protect and adhere to security protocols, are we still relying on cloud-based solution providers to protect their environments? What is the best way to vet them?
The best way to
vet them.
Oh, yeah. So I would have a lot of bias in this answer. I have to be careful about that, but it is true. We have the whole spectrum in the cloud. Ignite happens to come from being a platform cybersecurity first company for 16 plus years. So we have never been a consumer product. And that you can think of many companies that are trying to become professional grade that started out as consumer file sharing and storage applications, right? That's a different place to start from, and perhaps doesn't offer enterprise cybersecurity first kind of protections. So you can explore that, and it's a good idea to do so, right? Whenever you're looking at these platforms, like what certifications do they meet? I can't say that this applies specifically to manufacturing. We have a number of ISO standards and things like that we look at for things like manufacturing. In like federal government work, CMMC 2.0 is a compliance metric that all federal projects, all DoD funded projects have to meet by October 25, and we're fully compliant with that. So you can look at what they tout as, as their the protocols that they meet. That's probably a good place to start. You can have discussions about how they address things like threat prevention, detection, prevention, recovery. I'm not sure. That may not be a great answer, but that's the start of an answer.
Thank you, Aaron. And for those of you as participants, I have changed your settings. So if you have a question you would like to personally ask, you are encouraged to unmute yourself right now and ask directly. Otherwise, you can continue to put your questions into the Q&A or into the chat. Okay, well, hearing none, Glenn, I think you're up next.
Hey, well, I tell you what, Aaron, you've been very informative. I've personally learned a lot. And I just want to thank everybody for attending. Elizabeth, man, appreciate you very much. Here's our contact information. If you have any additional questions or come up with any additional questions, in addition to this, there's a copy of this webinar can be found at the MGA YouTube channel. Basically, that's all I have. So appreciate it. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Glenn. And again, thank you, Aaron, so much. We really appreciate your expertise and your contributions to the conversation. MGA is hosting another webinar on Monday. This will be all about the importance of creating a people-first healthcare plan. We will be featuring our partners at Gibson, as well as featuring a local manufacturer called Fastco Industries. Again, Aaron, Glenn, thank you so very much. And thanks everybody for joining us today.